Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sally Allen podcast. On this podcast, we give people a platform to share their stories of resilience. I personally believe that sharing our stories is not only empowering, but it also helps us heal, and it helps other people to see that they're not alone in their walk and journeys and their stories. Today, the question of our podcast is, what does walking up the side of the mountain blindfolded has to do with taking responsibility for your life? And on the show today, we have our friend Kim Allen. Kim is a habit transformation coach and speaker. I met Kim a few months ago and she became my soul sister, and I'm so excited to have her on the show today. So Kim, tell us about blindfolding, walking up the side of the mountain, and responsibility for your life.
Hey, first of all, Sally, I want to say thank you for having me, for having this opportunity for people to speak their stories.
Yeah.
And so, there's quite a story underneath that. And I will get to that and what that awakening was as we talk a little bit more.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I know you have a lot of different stories and a lot of, different facets of your story. So I'm curious about what you're sharing with us today.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to share a little bit about my life and growing up and how you get to a point where enough is enough and you decide to shift.
Yeah, I like that.
So my story starts out being a little girl. Like the first recollection I have of being a little girl, I was probably like 4 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. And let me preface this by saying that I've spoken to my mom about all of this, and we've come to this place in our journey where we can speak openly, which is awesome. And so it was Christmas Eve. I had received a little baby buggy, and I was pushing my little brother around in it. And, a little girl, 4 years old, pushing her 2-year-old brother around, he gets his finger stuck. And he started to cry. And my dad came up and took him out of the stroller and said, "How could you be so stupid? Why would you have your brother in the stroller?" And he proceeded to take his foot and put it through the stroller. And I can remember crying and running to my Opa, who is grandpa, and him telling me it was going to be okay. And that was the moment that I learned that I didn't matter as much or at all, right? And so as I grew up through life, I had a normal childhood. I grew up in Santa Barbara, California. And for those of you who don't know, that's a beach town, beautiful beach town. And I lived in the suburbs. We had the picket fence. We had the big green front lawn that I used to run around in. But behind closed doors, I was being molested. And it was like regularly. He would come into my room and I'd have to do things. And I can always remember begging my mom, don't leave me here, right? And she didn't know. She didn't know this was going on. And I remember there was a time when there was someone else who was over. And I'm not going to say who that person is, but it was nighttime and he had come into my room. And she woke up. And so not only did he molest me, he molested her. Because I didn't know any different. I'm telling her it's okay. I didn't know.
Yeah.
So I was probably 7 years old at that point. And of course, she went home and told her mom. And her mom called my mom. And I can remember sitting in the living room, all of us crying. And she asked the question, "How could you?" Well, what are you going to answer? How could you, right?
Yeah.
Other than, I'm sick and it won't happen again. Until it did. And, at that point, now I knew this wasn't right. I knew this was wrong. And so then I started to wet the bed. And because of all of that, knowing now that this isn't right, I was wetting the bed nightly. And so to cure that, let's put a calendar on the wall and let's give you some stickers that you can put on there. So every night that you don't wet the bed, You could put a sticker on.
Oh.
Or a smiley face. You know,
Was this from your abuser?
This was from my mom.
Your mom, okay.
So, you know, she thought this was the right thing to do.
Right.
And if you get to the end of the week and you have a good week, then we can go out and do something. We can do something fun, like go for ice cream. Well, I don't remember ever going for ice cream. And I asked my mom about this not too long ago, and she said, no, we didn't go out for ice cream. She goes, but you know why. We know why now you were doing that. Mm-hmm. And so from about the age of 7, 8 years old till I was about probably 10, I was wetting the bed. But the thing about it is my mom didn't know any different. And so she would get angry with me. And so the anxiety of I wet the bed let me in the middle of the night get a towel, let me put it in my bed, and then let me get up in the morning and be a good girl and make my bed. Mm. Well, I didn't usually make my bed. And so my mom knew that wasn't about being a good girl. But, you know, I learned to hide things. And so during this time of growing up, I also learned to not be seen. I didn't have friends over. People didn't come spend the night at my house. Mm. I would go to their house. And so I learned, you know, just hide yourself so that people don't know what's going on, because you don't want someone to know that stuff is going on.
Do you also think you were protecting your friends?
You know, I've never thought about it that way. I never thought about it that way. That's possible.
Yeah.
Especially after I knew.
Right.
Yeah. So, and part of the process of keeping me in control once I knew is that he would then resort to physical abuse. Mm. So that to make sure that I knew he was serious. And that was, he would choke me and he would tell me, if you tell anyone, I'll kill your mom, I'll kill your brother. So, of course, I didn't say anything, right?
Yeah.
Life went on, and life did go on. And then we moved, when I was 12, from Santa Barbara, the beach, to Victorville, the high desert. That was like a total culture shock for us. Oh, my goodness. As kids, it was like, what did you just do here, right? Yeah. So, but the problem with that was I didn't know anybody. And because I lived in my own world and didn't let people in, meeting new people I can't even describe how awful I felt, because I couldn't talk to people. I didn't have a voice. Mm-hmm. And so then I would get bullied in school. You know, people would come. Oh, I can remember this. A boy comes up to snap my bra. I'm 12 years old, right? I wasn't wearing one. I came from a place that was all natural, you know, living by the beach. You didn't wear makeup, you didn't wear bras, whatever. And oh my gosh, needless to say, I came to school the next day wearing a bra, right? Kids can be cruel for sure.
Yeah.
But I remember my first boyfriend. I was 13. And I was always looking for love. I just wanted love. I wanted to be rescued. I wanted to be saved. And this boy came along. He was a little bit older. It turned into I said no, he said yes. And that was the end of that. And that was my next experience of understanding that I didn't matter. My voice didn't matter, right? Mm. So we moved again when I was 15 from Victorville, which was a really different culture already, to a place where we lived on 10 acres. And, you know, your next neighbor is way over there. And so we became even more secluded, and I grew more inward. And so I had my first long-term boyfriend that started when I was 15. And that was 6 years of being young and doing things all the wrong way. But what came of that is my beautiful son. Mm. And that ended with, he was involved in drugs and things that I didn't know. I was pretty naive back then. And so what did I do? I went from relationship to relationship, toxicity, more abuse, until I was like 28 years old, I think. And I had gone to a party with some friends. It was my friend and her husband. And when I walked into this place, I knew I should have left. I knew this wasn't my kind of party. This was not my kind of party. But I decided to stay.
Yeah.
And they offered me a drink. Sure, I'll have a beer. And the next thing I know, I'm laying on the bathroom floor with no clothes on with a guy in there who's raping me. And I can remember gathering all my things up, racing out of the house, getting in my car. And it's, now by that time, it's almost 5 o'clock in the morning. And driving home, wondering, what did I just do? But I was exiting the freeway and I fell asleep at the wheel. And thankfully, I didn't crash my car. God was looking over me, even though I didn't know he was there at that time.
Yeah.
And it was my moment where I realized I have to do something different. I was at a crossroad. But what I did is I started dating another guy, an older guy. And he was going to save me. He was uber responsible. And even to this day, he had said, I thought I could love you enough for both of us. Right? So in some regards, he saved me from myself. But 10 years later, after feeling like I was controlled by my father, I left and went to someone else. But at this point, now I became that controller. I became the verbally abusive person.
Yeah.
Because no one was going to control me again. So that turned into liquid courage because he didn't have a voice. And so it came down to, after 5 years of marriage, the things flying across the room and cabinets slamming and the "I'm going to kill you." That's when I said, okay, this is over. And this is when I took a long, hard look at myself and said, what are you doing? You are the common denominator on all of this trauma that's happening in your life. What are you doing? So that's when I started down the path of personal development. And I had someone in my life who had always been sitting there, who invited me to go to this seminar a couple of years prior, and I just wasn't ready.
Right.
And I finally said yes. And that yes transformed my life. That was like the first step, to discovering myself.
Was there a defining moment or something happened? Like, I know there was a lot of things that happened, but what was that defining moment when you said, this is it, I'm done?
It was at the end of that marriage. It was
the end of the marriage.
After that, "I'm going to kill you." I can remember putting my ear pods in, and I went for a walk, and I must have walked 2 hours. I went through crying, I went through yelling, and I just said, you know what, this is it. This is enough.
Yeah.
This is something that you're doing to create. And so I knew it, I just didn't have the answers yet.
Right.
So back to your question about what does a blindfold and hillside have to do with owning your life. I was at a personal development event, and there was a group of us. We each had our own team, and we got blindfolded, and we put our hands were put on a rope, and you were to scale this hill. And I can remember, waiting for the person in front of me and waiting for the person in front of me. And finally, somebody whispered in my ear. I said, "What are you waiting for?" And all of everything that I had ever done in my life was super competitive because I was always trying to prove myself, whether that was work, whether that was activities, my personal life, it didn't matter. I was always trying to prove that I was good enough. And I heard that, and I shot like a bullet. And I remember it didn't matter who was in front of me. I was going to go around them. I was going to bulldoze them over. It didn't matter. I was going to get to the top. Well, I was almost to the top, and I came around this corner, and it hit me. And it was, "Kim, you have been running all your life, all by yourself," right? And I was running over people who were in my way. But where was I getting but more of what I didn't want? So that was the real turning point in my life, was that moment coming around that corner. Yeah.
So wow, like stop bulldozing people and running over people to get what you want because you're not getting anywhere.
Right. And I thought I was being kind.
Yeah.
I thought, I was doing all the right things.
Right.
But in order to prove myself, it didn't matter who was in front of me because I didn't matter. Right?
Right.
So I was trying to find where I mattered.
Right. So when you were going up the mountain, were you blindfolded?
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
So I was doing that without any sight.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
no longer afraid of falling off the side
Right.
of the hill. I was just gonna go.
Yeah.
And that's how I did my life. I went. And so I went from relationship to relationship. And I had every excuse of why it was their fault.
Right.
When I realized that I had a say in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to excuse anyone's behavior along the way.
Right.
Abuse is abuse, and I'm not discounting that or letting them off the hook. The responsibility that I took was that I was creating this. I was bringing these people into my life because I didn't love myself enough. Right? So taking ownership is taking responsibility for what you're creating, for what I was creating. And I was creating the things that I did not want.
Yeah. Stop the blame shifting for a minute,
Yes.
right? And take responsibility for what you are going through and who you are and what you're going to do about it.
Exactly, yeah. And all along this time, I'm raising a child. So he's living through all of this too, which, that creates that's like a whole nother story. But, when I realized that, society tells us they support being a victim. In my eyes, you tell someone your story and they're like, oh, I can't believe that. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Well, you know what? Yeah, it did. It did. But I'm not a victim today.
Right.
I was a victim then. And that's the difference of looking at yourself as that victim. You never get that opportunity to become that victor.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the real shift, is realizing that I had control over how I wanted to create or how I wanted the rest of my life to look. Now, that didn't mean I had the answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
It meant that I gave myself permission to really dig deep and get raw and real. No more surface.
Right.
Right? You know that I'm okay? I'm okay. I'm
Yeah.
okay. But you're really not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it happens a lot, though. Like they say, one of the best analogies is like you're going to church on Sunday and you're fighting with your family in the car and things are not right and there's so much going on and you're walking and then you slap that smile on your face. You're looking around. Hey, it's my sister. Okay, I'm doing well. I'm doing okay. And then you get in the car again and it's like, rah. It's like when to be transparent and when to be vulnerable and who to be transparent and vulnerable is very important.
Absolutely.
But at some point, we have to stop with the I am okay and start speaking up because if we don't, there'll never be healing and there'll never be that transformation and that growth that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. So how did you get there?
Well, once I took responsibility, I started to open my heart up to trusting people. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust anyone else. But what I found was I had to trust someone or start to. And so being able to share what was going on in my life, to be honest and open, and to learn to let it go. And let it go, we hear that all the time. And it's not an easy process. But letting go involves accepting that something has happened. Then no longer defining yourself by it. So I carry the identity of victim, of being damaged or broken. And I have this theory behind broken. Nobody's broken, right?
Right.
You are whole. Your being, your body is whole. Your beingness is what's been shattered, mm-hmm. right? But when I think about broken, I just think, like, once you break something, You have to glue it back together.
Right.
And it never looks as good as it did originally. But I don't believe that in healing. So that's why I don't like to look at it as broken.
Right.
And yeah, it's painful, but you can put yourself back together. You can heal and be better than you ever were. And that's the opportunity to grow and become what you want. You're not defined by this past pain or this past experience. And yet, we carry that. We carry that baggage because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we know.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you hear that phrase, get uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that applies to leaving difficult situations. Yeah. Is that when you leave, it's uncomfortable and it's scary, even though it's the best thing for you.
Yeah. Stepping out of your comfort zone, because what they say, nothing grows in the comfort zone.
Right.
Right. But what happened? I'm curious, your story. What happened when you ran up that mountain blindfolded and you realized, wow, I'm doing it again, right? I'm running over people, but no more. Mm-hmm. What are some of the steps that you took? And I'm sure you're still working through that, but what are some of the things you can share with our listeners so that if they're like that or they struggle with that, that could help them?
So it was kind of crazy because you get to the top and you're sitting up there blindfolded and they seat you down. They seat you. Mm-hmm. And when they pull the blindfold off, you're looking over. It was like, I describe it as the Lion King, when Mufasa is holding, right? And you're looking over this vast valley and it's just daybreak. And the feeling was like freedom, right? So from there, I started putting into play every day certain things. Journaling was such an important part of my journey. Being able to be open and honest with myself and I hired a coach.
Right.
So I was working with a coach, and the thing about working with a coach is they don't tell you what to do. Right? They help you discover.
Yeah.
And the discovery of myself, some things were hard. Some things were like, it took me a long time to admit that this is who I had become.
Yeah.
But when you reflect on that and you take that as fuel.
Yeah.
To ignite what you want next and never quitting, waking up every day and knowing that you have an opportunity to create something different today.
Yeah.
But also in one of my experiences, which this is probably one of the bigger parts of it, is that being out in a tent with a journal and a pen and myself for 24 hours and a bottle of water. And what happens when you silence your mind completely without any kind of distraction for that amount of time, by myself in a tent, out in the middle of nowhere? Your mind races to start with. It's like, how am I going to do this? I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm this. I'm that, right? But eventually you come to this place of calm if you choose to surrender.
Right.
And so I could remember I had slept, I had woke up, gone back to sleep, journaled. And I finally laid there and I was looking up at the sky and I just said, you know what? God, if you're there, this is the time.
Yeah.
This is the time. And so that was the big shift for me spiritually, is to be able to accept that there was a God. So then I started down that path of understanding, who God is and how he's, played a role in my life.
Right.
And I need a second here. That's quite emotional, that one.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Oof. Anyway, so really standing in faith and I think it's that surrender. It really is. And even now when things get hard and I find that I'm trying to control everything, because I still have that need to, push people away and be like, I got this, right? Yeah. But then I get back into that place of, okay, hold on. No, I don't have this. I don't have this. God has this.
Yeah.
and I surrender, it like puts me on the next path.
Yeah.
It creates that clarity and allows the weeds to be, pushed aside, and I can start to think clearly again and start moving forward. And it's really about not just sitting in your stuff.
Yeah. And to understand that there is a higher power. You can sit before God and just put your problems before him and he will take care of it. Like we don't have to struggle with everything.
Yeah.
It'll happen. We just got to trust, right? Have that courage and faith and trust.
Yeah.
I love that. Love that. So Kim, I know you do habit transformation coaching. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's interesting how that happened because I spent 26 years in corporate America.
Yeah.
Never, ever thought to get into coaching. But as I went through my own coaching journey and I saw how I transformed, I wanted that for other people. And so, I don't know, it was like I had a breakthrough. I had a break down moment, I guess you could call it. I was working, a lot of things were changing in my work, and I hit burnout, and I quit my job. I sold my house and I moved out of state all in like a 3-week period. And I don't suggest anybody do that, okay? I do not suggest this to anyone, but I did it. And that was, I moved here to Las Vegas from California. And although it's been the hardest thing I ever did, it's been the most rewarding thing. And somewhere along this path of being here and all the shift and change and failure, had a lot of failure and a lot of getting back up. And that's when I was like, I'm resisting something that's speaking to me. And because what I loved about working with people was that I could mentor them. And I didn't just mentor them in their workspace. I knew all about them. I knew them personally. And so I was like, this is a gift for you, and just go down that path. So I did. I took the leap. I got certified because I want to help other people see that there is possibility and there is hope when you believe in yourself. And so that's how I got to this place, is helping people overcome those same things that I did.
Yeah. And do you find as you're continually helping people and watching them grow and watching them transform, that it transforms you also, and it continues to give you that confidence and boost in your life?
Oh, absolutely. Healing it doesn't just end.
Yeah.
Right? Growing you don't just read a book and get to a certain place in your life and be done. And I mean, some people do.
Yeah.
But no, it's a constant process, because one is when someone has a breakthrough, it's like the most amazing feeling, right? It's like seeing somebody have that. It's like, whew, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But also for myself, it's like, oh, I hadn't thought of things that way. And, oh, that's what I was feeling right now. And still being a coach, there's days I wake up where I got to work through something, right? And I think that's as people. And a lot of times we don't want to admit that we have work to do. And I believe there's always work to do.
Yeah.
And when we can admit that, it's so much easier to work through it and keep becoming my better self every day, whatever that looks like.
I love that word, becoming. I just came from a conference from Ignite Life last week, and their whole theme was becoming. Because we're always becoming. You've never landed, and you will never arrive. You're always changing and growing and evolving. So I really like that word, becoming. So Kim, what's one takeaway today that you have for our audience?
One takeaway would be that you are not your past, and your past is not you. And you are not defined by that past. A lot of times we limit ourselves because of what our past looked like, what was in it, the mistakes we made, whether you've gone through a trauma like I've described or you haven't. If you've made mistakes that you have shame around, that's not who you are. That was a mistake. That was a decision. That's not you.
Yeah.
If you've been through a divorce, okay, it happened. It didn't feel good. Let that go. You are not that. You are so much more. And whatever you decide to create in your life, that's up to you.
Yeah.
And so don't surrender to the past pains.
Right.
Surrender to your becoming.
Right.
So that you can grow and be whoever you want to be.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And remember, friends, it's never too late to start living resiliently. And one of the things I got out of this today, as Kim was sharing, is that we have to own where we are. We have to take that responsibility, and we have to stop with blame shifting. So thank you again, Kim, for coming on the podcast. We want to thank our listeners, and thank you so much for listening. And thanks to our friends at Sticky Paw Studios. If you like our podcast, please rate, review, and share with your friends.